Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Garrett Lane couldn't believe it. After 6 months of agonizing, countless sleepless nights, and endless meetings, Garrett Lane, finally finalized the deal, a $10 million merger for Lane Harwick Securities. That kind of win is enough to get his name out there in the industry. The boardroom was full of energy that afternoon, and his team buzzed around him like bees in a hive. Someone opened a bottle of champagne, and the bubbles sprayed onto his jacket, but he didn't care. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked, and his CFO, Mark, slapped him hard on the back, nearly causing him to spill his drink. "You did it, Garrett. You're a fucking legend." "I'm sorry," Mark shouted over the din. Garrett grinned, soaking it all in. But deep down, he just wanted to get out of there. The victory felt good, but he wanted to share it more with the one person who mattered most, his wife, Tessa. She'd been the one he'd relied on in the mess of this deal. Or at least that's what he'd thought. It was as if he saw her waiting at home, her warm smile lighting up their quiet living room. And he knew that was where he needed to be. As Garrett pulled into their driveway, the sun was slowly setting, coloring the sky orange and pink. He grabbed the heavy duffel bag from the passenger seat. It was stuffed with what he'd told himself were just papers, placeholders for real cash that was still locked away in the company vault. He didn't want to deal with it tonight. The vault could wait until morning. Walking into the house, he called out, "Tessa, I'm home." She came out of the kitchen, her dark hair tied back in a casual, messy bun, wearing the soft gray sweater he liked her to wear best. "Hey, big guy," she teased, her voice light and playful. Garrett held up that bag and said with a hint of pride, "We did it. The merger is complete." $10 million went into a bank account. Her eyes widened, and she let out a small squeal as her arms wrapped around him. The scent of her lavender shampoo hit her, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. They sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, and Garrett told her everything that had happened during the day. The tense final meeting, the last-minute concessions the other side had made, how he had bluffed his way through their counteroffer. She listened, nodding her head, her hand on his. "You're incredible, Garrett," she said, and Garrett believed her. He handed her the duffel bag, the weight of it making her grunt as she took it. "I'll leave it with you tonight," said Garrett, lightly, as if it were no great matter. "I'll take it to the vault tomorrow. I'm too tired and lazy to toss it now." She flashed her sweet smile, the kind that always made Garrett feel like he could trust her with anything. "Of course," she said, coming over to kiss his cheek. Her lips were soft, and Garrett felt a wave of warmth travel through his body. She stood up and took the bag to the check room in the foyer, tucking it behind a couple of coats. "Safely put away," she called back. Garrett laughed softly and sank deeper into the couch. The rest of the night was simple and exactly what Garrett wanted. They ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and watched a boring TV show about home remodeling. Garrett kept sneaking glances at her, thinking how lucky he was. After 3 years of marriage, she still manages to make his heart skip a beat. Sure, they've been through some ups and downs lately, arguing over his long hours at work and her feeling neglected. But tonight felt like a fresh start, a celebration of them, not just that deal. About 11 o'clock, Garrett yawned, his eyes heavy with the fatigue of the day. "I'm exhausted," he said as he stood up and stretched. Tessa nodded, gathering the empty pizza boxes. "Go to bed, I'll clean up." Garrett kissed her forehead, lingered there for a second, then shuffled up the stairs with heavy steps. While brushing his teeth, Garrett contemplates this merger, that bag, and the future. Everything seems to be on track. He crawled into bed, the sheets cool against his skin, and drifted off into a deep sleep, imagining tomorrow's newspaper headlines about his tremendous victory. "Tessa would have been proud of me," he told himself. "She would have been there for me, cheering me on." What he doesn't know, what he can't know, is that just as he's slumbering, dreaming of their life together, Tessa is already planning something else. That duffel bag was more than a placeholder for her. It was a ticket to a new life. And he, unsuspectingly, gave it to her, trusting her as he always did. The slight intoxication from the champagne, the warm glow of the night, it all blinded him. He didn't hear her footsteps coming down the stairs, didn't notice the quiet rustle of her packing, didn't feel the change in the air as if the house was holding its breath. All he saw was her smile, her kiss on his cheek, the way she looked as if nothing had happened as she tucked the bag away. How could he be suspicious? She was his wife, his partner, his Tessa. and by the next morning, she would be gone, leaving him with nothing but a mocking laugh and a lesson he would never forget. The early morning sunlight hit Garrett in the face like a slap in the face, pulling him out of his deep, dreamless sleep. He rolled over, expecting to feel the warmth of Tessa beside him, but the other side of the bed was cold and the sheets hadn't moved at all. He rubbed his eyes, thinking she probably got up early to make coffee or something. "Tessa? I'm sorry," he called out, his voice a little raspy from just waking up. No answer. The house felt so quiet, like it was holding its breath. He flung his legs over the side of the bed and shuffled toward the bathroom with his bare feet on the hardwood floor. Her toothbrush was still there, dry as a bone. A sense of foreboding began to haunt him, but he forced it down. She's probably just out for a walk, he told himself. It's Saturday, no reason to panic now. The living room downstairs looked the same as it did last night. The pizza box was gone, the wine glasses were in the sink, but something always felt wrong. He couldn't say at first. He picked up his cell phone from the coffee table and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Tessa, leave a message." Her cheerful voice rang out. He hung up, frowned, and tried again with the same result. The knot in his stomach tightened. "Come on, Tess," he mumbled under his breath, pacing towards the kitchen. It was then that he saw it. A lone piece of paper sat on the counter, her elegant handwriting hitting him like a punch in the chest. He picked it up, his hand trembling slightly as he read the words she had left. "Thanks for the money, Garrett. I'm starting over with Julian. Good luck, and start over." For a moment, Garrett just stood there, the paper trembling in his hands, his brain unable to process it all. Julian? Who's Julian? And the money? What money? Immediately afterward, reality came crashing down on him like a runaway freight train, that duffel bag. He dropped the note and sprinted for the check room in the foyer, yanking open the closet door so hard it hit the wall with a thud. The jacket is still there, but that bag is gone. His heart was beating wildly in his ears, a wild and panicked rhythm. She took it. She really took it. She ran off with a guy named Julian. He staggered back, his legs weak, and leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. "Impossible," he said to himself. "Never." Then, without warning, a burst of laughter rose from his throat, a short, sharp, maniacal laugh that echoed through the empty house. It wasn't funny, not at all, but it was so ridiculous he couldn't help it. Of course she left. Of course she played him like that. Tessa, with her sweet smile and gentle kisses, has been planning this all along. He gave her the bag, thinking it was just for safekeeping, and she saw an opportunity. He raked his hand through his hair and paced around the living room, his mind racing. How long has she been planning this? Was this Julian some guy she'd met at the gym, the grocery store, or at one of those charity events she always dragged him to? He didn't even know who he was. And yet, here he was, stealing his wife, and the money he thought was his. But the point of the matter is that she only knows half of it. Laughter erupted again, louder this time, as the joke was directed at her. The bag she took, it wasn't even real. Garrett slumped on his ass on the couch and put his hands over his head, letting the truth cover him like a warm blanket. The real $10 million was still well and truly in the company vault, locked behind a steel door for which only he knew the combination and the key. What he'd given her last night was just bait, a heavy duffel bag stuffed with training manuals, forged financial documents, and a little extra surprise that he and Micah had helped put in, a tiny, undetectable GPS chip hidden in the lining of the bag. In the lining of the bag. Tessa thought she'd won, thought she'd rolled up all his belongings and gone away with her new boyfriend. But she didn't know that he'd seen it coming, not the specifics, not Julian, but the rift that had long been there between them. They've been estranged for months. She stopped asking about his day's work and started picking fights over petty things. He came home late at night. He was focused on his work. He blamed it on stress and told himself everything would be fine when the merger was over. But in retrospect, the signs were always there. She spent more and more time glued to her cell phone, giving vague answers about where she'd been. He trusted her because he loved her, because he couldn't imagine her betraying him. However, the reality is this. Garrett picked up her note again and reread it, letting the words sink in. "Good luck, and start over." She wrote as if she had left him with nothing. "Oh, Tessa," he thought. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." He picked up his cell phone again, this time dialing Mike Reyes, his best friend, and the shrewdest legal advisor he knew. The phone rang twice before being picked up, Mike's voice laced with sleep. Garrett? It's only 7 in the morning, right? Are you okay? Garrett didn't waste any time. She's gone, man. Took the bag and ran off with a guy named Julian. There was a moment of silence. Then Mike let out a low whistle. Damn, she really did. Garrett could hear him sitting up, having switched to strategist mode. But you don't sound panicked. Why? Garrett leaned back on the couch with a sneer. Because she took the bait. The decoy program kicked in. Mike laughed, the kind of big laugh that comes from the heart and makes Garrett feel a little lighter. You're a genius, you know that? What's next? Garrett stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. Somewhere, Tessa and Julian are probably celebrating, thinking they've hit the jackpot. We're letting her run, Garrett said, his voice stabilizing. GPS is active. I opened my laptop to see where she'd gone. You get your team ready. We don't chase her, we spy on her. Micah was silent for a second, then said, Are you sure you're okay? This is your wife we're talking about. Garrett swallowed hard, the sting of betrayal still fresh. The moment she wrote that note, she ceased to be my wife, he told him. And now she's just a thief who doesn't know she's been captured. He hung up the phone, grabbed his laptop from the dining room table, and turned it on. The GPS software is already installed, a small gift from Micah's tech. A blinking dot appeared on the screen, moving fast, too fast for a car. She could be on a plane or a train. He doesn't know yet, but he'll find out soon enough. He poured himself a cup of coffee, its bitterness matching his mood, then sat down and began to spy. Tessa thinks she's got him fooled, but little does she know that the game has just begun and he holds all the cards. Garrett sat at the kitchen table, the laptop screen glowing in front of him, the blinking dot moving across the map, taunting him. Tessa's gone, and he still can't quite wrap his head around it. The coffee in his cup was cold, but he didn't care. He was too focused on staring at the GPS signal and watching her run off with that decoy bag and the unknown Julian. The cell phone on the desk buzzed, and Micah's name lit up. He picked up the phone and didn't even bother to say hello. She took the bait, he said, his voice calmer than he felt. Micah's laugh came through the line, loud and easy. I knew it, man. You sure know how to pick him, don't you? Garrett laughed bitterly, despite the vague pain in his chest. Yeah, count me out this time. But don't let her get away with it. Micah wasn't just his best friend. He was the one who walked Garrett through every chaotic step of building Ryan Harwick Securities. Micah helped Garrett plan this little trap a few months ago when he first started noticing Tessa becoming distant. It wasn't a foresight that she would leave, not exactly, just a foresight that she might try to do something about it. What the hell happened to that bag? I'm sorry, Micah asked, his tone turning businesslike. Garrett leaned back in her chair and glanced out the window at the empty driveway where her car had once been parked. It's just like we set it up. Training manuals, forged financial documents, and the GPS chip you got from your buddy. He paused. The real cash, $10 million, is still locked in the vault. All she had was a pile of scrap paper and a tracker. Micah let out a low whistle. You're cold, Garrett. Cold and unfeeling. I like it. Garrett doesn't feel cold, at least not yet. He felt primal, like someone had violently ripped the bandage off a wound he didn't know existed. Tessa's note was still on the counter, her handwriting snaking across the paper like she was signing a confession. He picked it up again, rereading it for the third time this morning. Thanks for the money, Garrett. I'm starting over with Julian. Julian. The name was etched in his mind like a brand, an invisible shadow he could not catch. Is he some slick guy who hooked up behind her back? A coworker? A friend he shook hands with at a party? He didn't know, and that made it worse. Garrett, are you still listening? Micah's voice pulled him back to reality. Well, Garrett said, tossing the note back onto the counter, just thinking. Where did she go? That is moving fast. He heard the sound of tapping on a keyboard coming from Micah's side, presumably pulling up the same software. It looks like it's heading for the airport, Micah said after a moment. Maybe a private jet? She's not wasting any time. Private jet. The news hit him hard. She planned it, really planned it. It's not a spur-of-the-moment elopement. She's ready for an escape route, an accomplice, a whole new life without him. Garrett gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the anger that was about to boil over. Very well, he said at last. Let her think she's flying high. We're waiting to see how far she can fly. Micah, and he worked out the plan like a game of chess. It started a few months ago, during a late-night strategy session at their office. Garrett has been complaining about Tessa, about how distant she's become, about how she no longer cares about the merger that consumed him. Micah leaned back in his chair, shaking his glass of whiskey, and said, "You trust her too much, man. What if she's not what you think she is?" At the time, Garrett laughed it off and said he was too paranoid. But the seeds of doubt have been planted. A week later, he asked Micah to help set up a contingency plan just in case. They filled a duffel bag full of junk, made it look real with some forged documents, and added a GPS chip. Garrett never thought he'd need it. It was an insurance policy, a safety net for a marriage he didn't want to admit was falling apart. For now, he appreciated Micah's cynicism. Garrett stood up and paced the kitchen, his bare feet snapping on the tiles. Without her, the house feels too big and empty. He could still seem to smell the scent of her lavender shampoo lingering in the air, taunting him like a ghost. "What's next?" "I'm sorry," Micah asked, pulling him back to reality. Garrett stops at the sink and stares at the wine glass she used last night, a faint lipstick mark still on the rim. "We track her," he said. "Find out where she landed and who this Julian is. Then we tighten the net." "I don't know," Micah grunted in approval. "You're not going to let her off easy, are you?" Garrett thought for a second about the woman he had loved for 3 years, the woman he had built a life with. "She made her choice," he said, "and now she's going to have to live with the consequences." The truth is, it's not just about revenge, not really. Tessa and he have been having problems for some time now, and he's chosen to ignore them, burying his head in his work rather than confront them. All those late nights, all those arguments, the way she sometimes looked at him like he was a stranger. He saw the signs, but didn't want to believe them. He'd let himself believe that MNA would fix everything, and that they'd be fine once he had the time. But betrayal, that was a line he hadn't expected her to cross. Not like this, not with a smug little note in a bag she thought was full of his money. Garrett turned back to the laptop, the dots still blinking, each second further away from him. She thought she'd won, thought she'd broken his heart. But she didn't know that he was ready for this. Not her leaving, but her trying to break him down. "Micah," Garrett said, his voice steadying, "have your men follow up. I'm updating every hour. Also, look up any info on Julian. Anyone she might have come in contact with, friends, co-workers, whatever." Micah didn't hesitate. "Do it now. How are you doing over there?" Garrett looked around the kitchen at the life they'd built together, now just an empty shell. "Well," he lied, "I'm fine." He hung up the phone and sat down again, his eyes locked on that spot. Right now, that's his lifeline, his way of figuring out what's really going on in his marriage. He doesn't know who Julian is or how long Tessa has been lying to him, but he'll find out. And when he finds out the truth, he'll make sure she realizes that the bag wasn't the only bait. He was playing a game she didn't even know she had stepped into. He leaned forward, elbows propped on the table, and gazed at the screen. The dot continued to move, carrying Tessa and her new life further and further away from him. Let her run, he thought. Let her think she's free. Because every mile she walks, every smug giggle she shares with Julian, just leads her deeper into the trap he's set. She will soon realize that the money isn't real, and neither is her victory. Garrett took a sip of his cold coffee and frowned at the flavor before settling in for the long haul. It's not over, far from it. Garrett couldn't take his eyes off the damn blinking dot of light on his laptop screen, watching it trace a path across the map as if Tessa were taunting him from thousands of miles away. The kitchen was dark now. The sun had long since set, and the only light came from the dim glow of the screen and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Micah called an hour ago, his voice shrill with the new news. She was on a private plane, Garrett, flying to Morocco. And guess what? Julian just tagged himself in a luxury villa on Instagram. These idiots, they don't even try to hide it. Garrett leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, a bitter smile sweeping across his lips. Morocco, huh? Looks like she's getting away with it on my dime, or rather, she thinks it's my dime. I don't know. Micah let out a soft laugh. You're much calmer than I expected. Garrett hadn't told him the truth, and he was a mess inside, a mix of anger and hurt that he couldn't untangle. Instead, he said, let them enjoy it. I want them to let their guard down before I deliver the killing blow. Tessa's always been good at that, confusing people, making them feel like they're the center of her world. Garrett remembers the night they met 3 years ago, at an investor's party downtown. He was in the middle of pleasing a client and felt a little out of place in a crowd of suits and beads. Then she walked over, a glass of champagne in her hand, her dark hair falling over one shoulder like a wave. "You look like you'd rather be somewhere else," she said, her voice silky smooth. Garrett was caught off guard, and she smiled back. It was that smile that captured him on the spot. She's full of charisma, the kind of woman who can convince anyone to do anything. By the end of the party, Garrett had her phone number, and 6 months later, they were married. He thought he had won the jackpot. Now he understood what it was. She had been toying with him from the beginning, scrutinizing him like prey. Garrett poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bottle on the bar, the burn of the alcohol calming him as he paced the living room. The GPS point of light has stopped moving, presumably over the Atlantic Ocean, and is in flight. Micah's technicians confirmed the plane's course, and Garrett could picture her on the plane, sipping expensive drinks and laughing with Julian as if they had succeeded to reveal the heist of the century. The thought made his stomach twist. Who is this man? Some smooth-talking liar she met behind her back? A lover she's been hiding? He doesn't have the answers yet, but he'll find them. Right now, all he could do was wait, and the waiting was driving him crazy. He sat paralyzed on the couch, in the same spot they'd sat last night, her legs curled up, that duffel bag between them. She was so convincing, the excitement she showed about the merger, the way she kissed him on the cheek when he handed her the bag. "Safely put away," she said, putting the bag away. He believed every word because he wanted to believe them. But in retrospect, everything was too perfect. She knew exactly what to say and how to play the role of a loving wife while planning her departure. And he, too tired and too caught up in his own victory to see through it. The whiskey burned his throat again, and he heaved the glass down on the coffee table. "You're a fool, Garrett," he whispered to himself, "a damn fool." Micah's voice echoed in his head, an update from him about the disposable cell phone they'd stuffed in the bag. It's not just the GPS chip that allows them to spy on her. That cell phone was encrypted, a trick they devised to monitor her calls, text messages, and anything she did after she landed. "She has no idea," Micah said at the time, almost triumphantly, "that they're going to use that phone and we're going to hear everything." Garrett nodded in agreement then, impressed with his friend's vision. But now, sitting here alone, it feels less like a victory than a lifeline. He needed to know what she was saying, what she was thinking. Was she mocking him, bragging about how easily she'd fooled him? Or did she feel a twinge of guilt, perhaps, or doubt? He suspects. Tessa never did things like doubt. She was always all in, always. Garrett thought of Morocco and the villa Julian had flaunted online. He opened Julian's Instagram on his phone and scrolled through the post Micah had mentioned. There it is, a photo of a sprawling white house with a swimming pool and the ocean sparkling in the distance. "A new beginning," the caption reads, and marks a location in Marrakesh. The man had dark hair, a cocky smile, and a tanned skin that looked rich, or at least pretended to be. Garrett doesn't recognize him, but that doesn't mean anything. Apparently, Tessa has a life he knows nothing about. He threw his cell phone onto the mat next to him and clenched his hands into fists. They're probably already there, opening that bag, conceptualizing their next move. Let them go, he thought. Let them dig the hole deeper. The plan was simple and entirely his own. Micah helped with the details, but the ideas came from Garrett himself, born of those late-night doubts he'd buried for months. He tells himself it's paranoia, that Tessa won't betray him, but he sets the bait anyway. Now it worked. That bag was more than a ruse. It was a test, and she utterly failed. Garrett stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the darkened street. The neighborhood is quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only one left in the world. He wondered if she had ever loved him, or if it had all been one long con. 3 years of smiles and promises just to get to this moment. Whiskey doesn't help anymore. It just makes the problem louder. He went back to his laptop and refreshed the GPS tracker. The point of light, still stationary, has landed, probably in Morocco, a place they had talked about going to back when they were still happy, or rather, when he thought they were still happy. "We'll go someday," she had said, curled up next to him, flipping through a travel magazine. Sunshine, spice, a little adventure. He kissed her then and promised her the whole world. Now she got there without him, with him. And here he was, plotting her downfall. The irony of this was not lost on him. Garrett took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. It's not about the past, not anymore. It's about what happens next. Let them let their guard down, he said aloud, his voice steady in the empty room. Let them think they're in control. He could visualize it now. Tessa in her long, flowing dress, Julian pouring a drink, the two of them raising their glasses in celebration of their brilliance. They'd open that bag soon enough, expecting piles of cash, only to find the little surprises he'd prepared, those training manuals, the forged documents, and the GPS chip they'd never find. And when they find out, he'll watch. He'll be ready. Garrett closes his laptop and the screen dims, then picks up his whiskey again. The fall was coming, and he would make sure that it hit them hard. Tessa thought she knew him, thought she'd outsmarted him. But she doesn't know the man she abandoned, the one who's just starting to play this game in earnest. Garrett wakes up on the couch, his neck stiff from sleeping in an odd position. The empty whiskey glass remained in his hand. The house was silent, the kind of silence that weighs so heavily on you. Last night's revelation still swirled in his mind. That Tessa was in Morocco with Julian, that villa, that bait bag. Garrett set his mug on the coffee table and rubbed his face, trying to dispel the fog. The laptop sat close by, but he didn't need to check it out yet. He knew she was there, probably waking up to the sunrise over the ocean, thinking she had won. Let her think that, he told himself. It's all part of the plan. Today isn't about hunting her down. It's about tightening the screws and making sure she'll fall prey to her own greed. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Harper Sloan, his most trusted private investigator. The phone rang 3 times before being picked up, her voice rough, like she'd been up all night too. Garrett, you better have a good reason for calling me at this hour. Garrett glanced at the clock, 6:45 a.m. It's Tessa, he said, getting right to the point. She's gone. Took a bag she thought was full of $10 million and ran off to Morocco with a guy named Julian. There was a moment of silence. Then Harper let out a low, impressive whistle. I'll be damned, you're in a lot of trouble. Garrett pulled a small smile in spite of himself. It wasn't my choice, it was the dramatic scene she made. I need you to take over, Harper. She's got bait bags, fake documents, with GPS. I'd like to give her some credit. Harper owes him a favor. A few years ago, he helped her wrangle a difficult client who wouldn't pay. She's savvy, ruthless when necessary, and her tech team can hack into anything. How does it play? I'm sorry, she asked, her voice having sobered up considerably. Garrett leans forward, elbows braced on his knees. We let Julian think he dug a gold mine. Set up a fake bank profile, some investment opportunities, something enticing enough to get him to move. Leak the news and let him stumble upon it. I want them to chase their tails trying to turn that fake money into something bigger. Harper let out a dry, knowing laugh. You're so bad, Lane. I like it. Greed makes people stupid. They'll take the bait. Garrett stood up and paced the living room as the plan took shape in his mind. That's right. Tess is smart, but she's not my target. Julian is the weak link. He's already posting pictures online, like a fool. If we throw out the bait, he'll drag her down with him. Harper was silent for a moment, probably sketching notes. Operation Mirage, she said finally. That's what we'll call it. I'll have my people fake a profile, an offshore account, some legitimate-looking, dubious cryptocurrency scheme that can be linked to the documents in that bag. Do you have any specific information on this, Julian? Garrett shook her head, even though she couldn't see. Not yet. Mike's looking into it. All I know about him is his Instagram, luxury villa, Marrakesh, cocky smile, dark hair, and probably 35 years old. Enough to get started, she said. I'll cross-reference it with Tessa's contacts and see what I can find. In the meantime, we'll lay the bait. My text can forge an email to make it look like it's from one of your competitors, someone who might reasonably know she took the money. Julian finds out, thinks he's struck gold, and then we watch them struggle. Garrett nodded, feeling a twinge of control for the first time since he found the note. Perfect. And, Harper, monitor everything. Every call, every keystroke. That disposable cell phone in the bag is active, right? I'm sorry, she grunted. Oh, it's activated. When they use it, we can hear it. Just sit back and watch me work my magic. Garrett hung up the phone, walked to the kitchen, and brewed a pot of coffee, Harper's words echoing in his head. Operation Mirage. Very apt. Leave it to Tessa and Julian to chase a ghost, an illusory promise that vanishes when they reach for it. He poured a cup of dark, strong coffee and took a sip, letting the heat wake him up. The anger was still there, simmering under his skin, but now it had focus. It's no longer about catching Tessa in the act. She's shown her cards. It's about letting her build her own cage, brick by brick, until she can't escape. Harper is right. Greed makes people stupid, and he's betting that Julian is greedy enough to be greedy for both of them. He thought of Tessa, who was always so hungry for more. He'd given her everything when they'd married. A beautiful house, trips whenever he could arrange them, jewelry she'd hinted at with that sly little smile. But it's never enough. She'll ask for bigger and better, new cars, more luxurious vacations. He blamed it on her ambition, telling himself it was just her way. Now he understood that it was a hunger he could never satisfy. Julian must have promised her something he couldn't give, or maybe he was just stupid enough to think he could deliver. Either way, they were now on the same page, and he would use that against them. The laptop was still on the coffee table, and he opened it up and pulled up the GPS tracker. The point of light did not move and remained fixed in Marrakesh, probably the same villa. He imagined them there, lounging lazily by the pool, counting their imaginary millions of dollars. Does she feel a twinge of guilt? Would she think of him sitting in this house they shared? Or has he become a memory she has discarded? Garrett shook his head, shaking the thought away. There's no need to think. She made her choice, and he made his. Garrett closes his laptop, grabs his coffee, and heads upstairs to take a shower. He needed to clear his head and be ready for anything Harper might find. Under the hot water, he allowed his thoughts to return to the plan. Harper's fake bank details would be the bait, something irresistible, like a chance to triple the 10 million they thought they had. Julian will catch it. He can feel it. The guy posting selfies online is not the type to be discreet. And Tessa, she's going to go along with it because that's who she is. She always believed that her charisma would get her out of trouble. Not this time. Garrett scrubbed his hair, steam filling the bathroom, and he felt a cold satisfaction come over him. It's not exactly about revenge, it's about justice. She'd tried to take everything from him, and he'd let her think she'd succeeded just long enough to watch her fall. He stepped out, towel around his waist, and checked his cell phone. A text message from Harper. Profile is online, email sent. Waiting for the fish to take the bait. He grinned, genuinely this time, and texted back, "Great, keep me posted." The game is on, and he's in control. Tessa and Julian could run and plan, but every move they made, he anticipated. Garrett got dressed, jeans, a plain shirt, nothing special, just enough to make him feel like a human being. Downstairs, he poured another cup of coffee and sat down on the couch as the weight of the day ahead hit him. Harper is right. They will be greedy, and that greed will destroy them. All he had to do was wait, watch, and let Operation Mirage work. Later that afternoon, as Garrett sat at the kitchen table, sipping his third cup of coffee, Harper called. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows on the floor, and he'd been fidgeting all day, checking out that GPS light spot like it was a lifeline. They took the bait, Harper said, his voice buzzing with excitement. Julian's already poking around that fake investment profile we set up. He's arrogant, thinking he's found a loophole that will turn your money into a fortune. Garrett leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Perfect. What's he doing? She let out a short, sharp laugh. He was emailing back and forth with my dummy account, a broker named Victor, trying to set up a meeting. Tessa is also involved. I heard her on a disposable cell phone telling him to ask for more details. They're having a party tonight and want to impress some big shots. Party. Of course they're having a party. Garrett could see it clearly. Tessa in the red dress he'd bought for their second anniversary, the one that framed her curves just right. Julian strutting around as if he owned the Place Villa Blue Mirage. That's what Micah called it when he dug through the rental records. A sprawling place with pool and views, great for showing off. They move fast, Garrett said, shaking his cup of coffee. Harper grunted. Greed can't wait, Garrett. We've got our eye on them. Micah and I will go in tonight. I play a VC rep, Brooke, who's my assistant. The live screen is already set up. Ready to watch? Garrett stood up and paced to the window. Well, send me the link. I want to see every second. By nightfall, Garrett had moved to the living room, laptop open on the coffee table, beer in hand instead of whiskey. He needs to clear his head. The image popped up, a little blurry at first, becoming clearer as Harper's hidden camera adjusted. They're right there. Julian was wearing a white linen shirt and Tessa was wearing that damn red dress, talking to a group of people who look tanned and rich. The villa is all white walls and glass, and the pool glows blue under string lights. The music came vaguely through the speakers, and he could hear laughter, clinking of glasses, and the lively hum of the party. Harper's voice came through, smooth and professional as she introduced herself to Julian. Brooke Carter, Venture Capital. I hear you've got a big project on your hands. Julian grinned, showing a mouth full of teeth, and shook her hand. Oh yes, private capital transactions. Game changer. You'll find out later. Garrett watched Tessa move through the room, her smile dazzling as she circled the guests. She's always been good at that, making people feel special and attracting them. That's how she captured him at that party 3 years ago. Now she's using it against these strangers, these potential investors who have no idea that they're being peddled a lie. Julian tapped her on the shoulder and pulled her into a conversation with a gray-haired man in a suit. We've got the funding in place, Julian bragged loudly, loud enough to be caught on the microphone. Just waiting for the right partner to take it to the next level. Tessa nodded, her eyes glowing. It's the nail in the coffin, she added, her voice so confident it almost gave Garrett heartburn. Harper played her part perfectly, circling them like a shark. Sounds promising, she said, sipping her drink. What's the timetable like? I'd love to see proof of funds. Standard due diligence, you know. I don't know. Julian waved his hand casually. Oh, we're all set. Tessa, why don't you show them? Garrett's heart races as Tessa smiles and excuses herself, temporarily disappearing off-screen. He moved closer to the laptop, the beer in his hand forgotten. It's now. The moment they open the bag, the moment their little fantasies start to fall apart. The camera moves as Harper adjusts her position, following Tessa back into the frame. She carried the duffel bag, the one Garrett had handed her 2 days earlier, her fingers clutching the strap as if it were her ticket to freedom. The fun begins, Micah whispered through his comm device, his voice low. He stood off to the side, pretending to look at his cell phone, but Garrett knew he was watching as closely as he was. Tessa placed the bags on a table surrounded by a small group of guests: Julian, Harper, the gray-haired man, and a few others. That's it, she said, her tone almost giddy. $10 million. Ready to go? She unzipped the bag with a flourish and pulled out the forged financial documents we'd stuffed in at the top. Julian peeked over and nodded his head as if he could read. Look, rock solid, he said, handing the gray-haired man a page. But then Tessa reached deeper, her brow furrowing as she pulled out a training manual, one of those old Ryan Harwick securities manuals for new employees. What's this? I'm sorry, she murmured, turning it over. The room quieted, the noise subsiding as she continued to dig out, pulling out more manuals, a stack of forged check stubs, and then, there it was, a slip of paper stuck to the bottom of the bag. His note. It was written months ago when he and Micah set this trap, half a joke, half a warning. Tessa unfolded it, her face turning pale as she read the words on it out loud, her voice shaking. You always said you wanted to start over. Now you can, start with nothing. Gee. Julian's smile disappeared as he snatched the note from her hand. What the hell is this? He asked sternly, rummaging through the bag himself. The GPS chip is in there somewhere, still blinking, but they don't know it yet. The guests began to whisper and move about uneasily. Is this a joke? The gray-haired man asked, his tone sharp. Harper intervenes, her voice calm. It looks like a misunderstanding. Maybe we should clarify the numbers. But Tessa wasn't listening. She stared at the note, her hands trembling. Julian cursed under his breath and threw the manual back into the bag. It's not us, he began, but the damage was done. The crowd is backing away, whispers spreading like wildfire. Garrett sat there, frozen, watching it all unfold. She had opened that bag so proudly, so sure she had won, and now she stood in the ruins of her own lies. He didn't feel the joy of victory, not yet, only a cold, empty satisfaction. It was her own fault, her choice, and he let her walk right into it. See, Garrett? Micah's voice came through the comm device again. They're imploding. Garrett nodded, even though Micah couldn't see it. Well, the camera's on them. I'm gonna watch every second. Tessa looked up, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape exit. Julian is arguing with someone and the voices are getting louder, but it doesn't matter anymore. Disillusioned. They sold their scam in front of the wrong audience, and Garrett made sure they got nothing. Garrett leaned back on the couch and let out a long breath. Villa Blue Mirage lives up to its name, a beautiful lie crumbling under the weight of truth. And he's just getting started. Garrett watched the live feed of the Blue Mirage Villa until the screen went black. Harper's voice came out one last time. We're pulling out. The signal has been sent. It's done. I'm sorry, he said as he closed the laptop, and the silence of the living room engulfed him. The beer in his hand was warm and hadn't been touched since Tessa had opened that bag and read his note. Her pale, shocked, devastated face replayed over and over in his mind. And then there's Julian's face, his cocky smile twisted into panic as guests turned their backs on them. It should have felt good to see them fall apart like that, but it didn't, not really. It just felt like the end, as if whatever had been between them, the last shred of connection was there, thousands of miles away in Morocco, completely severed. The plan was more successful than he had hoped. Harper and Micah play their roles perfectly, her as the smooth Brooke and him as the silent backup, both fueling the chaos without revealing their identities. The mood of the room took a sharp turn for the worse when Tessa pulled out those manuals and his note. "What's this?" A man yelled, so loud that the microphone caught it. "You said you had the funds." Julian tried to laugh it off, stuttering something about getting confused, but Tessa just stood there, clutching the note as if it was burning her hand. The gray-haired investor left angrily, muttering something about fraud, and the others followed, leaving the party in shambles. Harper then signaled, quietly nodded to Micah, and just as the local police arrived, they slipped out, the police having been tipped off by an anonymous caller. Garrett didn't need to see the arrest to know what would happen next. He stood up, stretched his stiff legs, and walked to the kitchen. The clock on the microwave blinked 1:23 a.m. Hours have passed since the picture began, but it only feels like minutes. He poured the warm beer into the sink and replaced it with a glass of water, trying to wash the bitter taste out of his mouth. Tessa and Julian think they've pulled off a heist, but they're selling a scam to a group of people who don't tolerate childish behavior. The fake documents, the manuals, his notes, it's not just humiliation, it's evidence enough to get the police involved. Micah made sure of that by contacting an informant in Marrakesh who had been waiting for operational instructions. It's not about taking her back, it's about making her face the consequences of her own making. Garrett leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the spot where she'd put her note earlier. He'd crumpled it up earlier and tossed it in the trash, but the words still echoed. "Thanks for the money, Garrett. Good luck, and start over." She wanted him to feel that pain, to think she had left him with nothing. But she didn't know the bag was bait, didn't know he'd been several steps ahead of her. The real $10 million is still safe in the vault, and now she's the one with nothing, stuck in a foreign country with grand plans in ruins. He took a sip of water, the cold sensation stimulating his nervous system as he wondered what she was thinking right now. Is she cursing him? Blaming Julian? Or just sit there and realize you lost? The cell phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. "It's Micah. Still awake?" "I'm sorry," Micah asked when Garrett picked up the phone, his voice a little raspy from the night's running. "Well," Garrett said, walking back to the couch, "just watch the whole thing. You and Harper are perfect." Micah smiled, tired but content. "Man, you should have seen it for yourself. When she read that note, I thought she was going to pass out." Julian tries to run away and trips over a chair and runs about 10 feet before the police catch him. Garrett almost laughed as he imagined the scene. "What about Tessa?" Micah paused, his tone softening. She didn't move a muscle, just stood there, staring at the bag as if it had betrayed her. "The police took her away too. They're both in custody now." Garrett nodded, sinking into the cushions. "Very good. That's what I want." Not exactly. He had hoped that she would come clean, that she would choose him over all of this. But that ship had already sailed away from the harbor. Micah cleared his throat. "Are you okay, Garrett? I mean, really?" Garrett didn't answer right away, just listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the background. "Is he okay? His wife ran off with another man, tried to steal his money, and now she's in a Moroccan prison. I'll be fine," he said eventually. "Just need to get this over with." Micah didn't press the issue any further, just said, "Get some sleep, man. We'll talk tomorrow." Garrett hung up and tossed the phone aside, his eyes drifting to the ceiling. However, sleep did not come. He lay there, replaying the night over and over. The party, the crash, the way Tessa's world had fallen apart in front of everyone. She wore that red dress like armor, thinking it would carry her through, but it couldn't save her from this. He knew she was greedy. He knew she loved the life of luxury, but he never thought she would turn the tables on him. 3 years of marriage, and he'd missed it. The lies, the plans, the way she'd slipped away while he was busy building his life. The note in the bag wasn't just a taunt, it was the end. Now you can start with nothing. He wrote it with half anger and half hope that he would never need to use it. Now it became her reality. Garrett rose restless and walked to the check room in the foyer where the bag had once sat. It was empty now, just a couple of coats and an old pair of sneakers she'd left behind. He closed the door, harder than he thought he would, and went up the stairs. The bedroom feels like a museum. Her side of the bed still smelled vaguely of lavender, and her jewelry box sat open on the dresser. He didn't touch it, nor did he want to. Instead, he grabbed a blanket and went back to the couch, curling up under it as if he could shut out the whole world. The police will hold them. Micah said so. False documents associated with the bags will keep them there. Fraud, attempted theft, whatever the charge is. It's not his job to decide that. He just made sure they couldn't escape. The living room was dark, and the only sound was his own breathing. He thought about calling Harper and asking for more details, but what was the point? He'd seen enough. Tessa's face as she read that note. That would be the image he would remember. Not the woman he had loved, but the woman who had tried to destroy him. And Julian, the way he flailing as the police closed in. He was nothing but a pawn she used to play this game. They were to blame, and he let them off the hook. Garrett closed his eyes, the blanket warm against his skin, and he felt the first real wave of exhaustion hit him. It's not the end, not yet, but it's close. The public meltdown was complete, and he, in this quiet house thousands of miles away, had planned it all. Tomorrow, he'll figure out what to do next. Now he let the darkness consume him as the echoes of her voice finally faded. Garrett didn't sleep well that night, just off and on the couch with the blanket wrapped around his legs. He was already awake and staring at the ceiling when the sun peeked through a crack in the blinds. The real-time image of Tessa's face burned into his mind. Micah's phone call about her and Julian's detention had settled something in his mind, not calm, not yet, but a cold resolve. She tried to take it all away, and he gave it all back. Now he must face her one last time. A few days later, Micah made arrangements to meet in a small private office at a police station in Casablanca. "Are you sure you want to go?" he asked over the phone, his voice cautious. "You don't owe her anything." Garrett nodded to himself and stared out the kitchen window. "I know, but I need to see her. Need to hear what she has to say." The flight to Morocco felt like a blur, 10 hours of foul air and bad coffee, and his thoughts tumbled along. He arrived in Casablanca late in the evening and stepped out of the airplane as the heat came at him like a wall. Micah picked him up at the airport, his suit wrinkled from the trip, but his smile was sharp. "You look like shit," he said, tapping Garrett on the shoulder. "Feels like shit, too," Garrett grunted, tossing his bag into his rental car. They drove straight to the police station as the cityscape flew by, dusty streets, honking cabs, vendors shouting at each other. It all felt surreal, as if he was trapped in someone else's story. But it's his own story, and Tessa's waiting. The office was small, with bare gray walls, a metal desk, and 2 chairs. A guard brought her in. She had handcuffs on her wrists, her hair in a messy ponytail, no makeup, no red dress, just a plain white shirt and jeans. Her eyes were vacant. She didn't look like his Tessa anymore, not the woman who had kissed him goodnight a week ago. She sat down across from him as the guard backed up to the door. For a few moments, they just stared at each other. "You planned all this?" "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. Garrett leaned back in his chair, keeping his face impassive. "No," he said, "it's you." Her lips quivered and she looked down at the table, her fingers twisted together. "Garrett, I'm not." He interrupted her, his tone sharper than he expected. "Don't try to explain now." She winced, and Garrett saw tears begin to well up in her eyes. "Julian was the one who manipulated me," she said, her voice rising. "He said we could start over, that you didn't care anymore. I made a mistake, Garrett, I swear." Garrett almost laughed, but it stuck in his throat and was bitter and hard. "A mistake? You left me a note, Tessa. You took the bag and ran. That's not a mistake, that's a choice." She shook her head, tears pouring out, but he didn't believe it. He'd seen her cry and knew how well she could act when she needed to. He pushed the two folders across the table, the paper rustling in the quiet room. "Here's the situation," he said in a flat tone. "One is a plea bargain. House arrest, return what you took, testify against Julian. The other is a prison. Pick one." Her hand trembled as she reached for the folder and flipped open the plea agreement first. She stared at it for a moment, then looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You knew it from the beginning," she said, almost to herself. Garrett nodded slowly and deliberately. "I trust you, Tessa. Love you. And you cashed in your leverage to leave. I just didn't let you actually cash it in." "I'm sorry," she said, dropping the folder and covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "I didn't think it would end like this." He wanted to believe her, wanted to feel something, rage, pity, any emotion, but he was numb. "You just didn't think you'd get caught," he said as he stood up. "That's the difference." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, and for a second Garrett saw the woman he'd married vulnerable, beautiful, lost. "But it's not even true. Not anymore. Why are you doing this?" he asked, the question coming out of his mouth before he could stop it. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I feel trapped," she said. "You're always working, always away. Julian. He sees me, he listens. I thought I could have something new." Garrett gritted his teeth, the words hitting him harder than he expected. "You can talk to me," he said, "but you stole from me." To which she was speechless, just sitting there, staring at the two folders as if they were her lifeline. Garrett turned to the guard and nodded for him to take her back. "She'd better hurry," he said, turning back. "I don't have time to wait." She called his name as the door opened, but he didn't turn around. The corridor outside was narrow, and the air smelled of dust and sweat. Micah waits at the exit, leaning against the wall. "Well?" he asked, keeping up with him as he stepped out into the dazzling sunlight. "She cried," Garrett said, blaming Julian, saying she was sorry. "I don't know," Micah grunted. "Unsurprisingly. Do you believe that?" Garrett shook his head, didn't believe it for a second. They climbed into the car, the leather seats hot from the sun, and Micah started the engine. "She'll take the plea deal," he said, pulling onto the road, her lawyers already poking around. "Julian's screwed. Either way, he's got priors and no leverage." Garrett stared out the window, the cityscape blurring. "Very well," he grunted. "Let them work it out themselves." Micah glanced at him, hands gripping the steering wheel. "You didn't have to come here, you know. I can handle it." Garrett shrugged. "Need to see her. Need to know why." Micah didn't press the issue, just drove, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Garrett came up with her excuses, feeling trapped and neglected. Maybe some of it is true. He did bury himself in mergers and acquisitions and came home late, ignoring her complaints. But that doesn't excuse her behavior. She had a choice, and she chose Julian. She chose the bag. She chose the lie over him. Seeing her broken and desperate in that room didn't change anything. It just made it all real. He'd entrusted everything to her, his heart, his life, and she'd thrown it back in his face. This confrontation wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was about closing that door. Back at the hotel, Garrett stood on the balcony, the city sprawling away beneath him, lights twinkling in the twilight. Tessa is still in that cell, probably signing a plea deal. Julian is finished. His braggadocio has taken him to the brink. And here he was, alone, but not destitute. He gave her the chance to confess, and she lied to his face. That's enough. He took a deep breath, warm air filling his lungs, and felt the weight begin to lift, if only a little. Tomorrow, he'll fly home and leave this mess behind. Now, as he looked at the skyline, this chapter was coming to a close, and he knew that he would come out of it stronger than she had ever imagined. 2 days later, Garrett was back in the U.S. Just after stepping off the plane into the gray drizzle of the airport, jet lag hit him like a punch in the gut. Morocco felt like a post-fever dream. Casablanca, Tessa's tears, the police station, all of it faded into the background as he dragged his bags through the terminal. Micah stayed behind to handle the legal wrap-up, promising to keep him posted, but he's done with that part. He confronted her, listened to her excuses, and then left her to her fate. Now it's time to pick up the pieces of his own life. Starting with the parts she hasn't touched, the real $10 million and the merger that started it all. The ride home was quiet. The radio was off, and the only sound was the rain hitting the windshield. The house looked just as empty as he'd left it. too big for one man. But he didn't dwell on that feeling. He dropped his bag in the foyer and went straight to his office downtown. When he walked into Lane Harwick Securities, the company was busy and the team was still reeling from the success of the merger. Mark, his CFO, was the first to spot him, grinning widely and waving. "Here comes the key man. Thought you were already on your way to the beach." Garrett forced himself to smile and shook his hand. "Not yet. There's some finishing touches to take care of." Mark didn't ask about Tessa. Word had probably gotten around, and Garrett was grateful for that. He spent the morning finalizing the deal, signing documents, and shaking hands with board members. The $10 million had long since been transferred, safely deposited into an investment account he'd set up a few weeks ago, before Tessa even knew what was coming. It wasn't just about keeping her out of reach, it was about the next plan. He'd been mulling over an idea for months, something more ambitious than this merger, something that would last long after all this chaos. At noon, he called a meeting with the core team, Mark, Harper, and a few others, and unveiled the plan. "We're launching the Lane Foundation," he said, standing at the head of the table, a $10 million seed fund focused on entrepreneurs from troubled backgrounds, people who don't get opportunities. The room fell silent. Then Mark nodded slowly and thoughtfully. "This is a big move, Garrett. Very big." Harper had just returned from Morocco and was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "I like it. Keep the money flowing, not just sitting around." She had just flown back that morning, and her eyes were still sharp despite the trip. "You're the head of security," Garrett said, pointing at her, "and no one is better at spotting trouble than you." "I'm sorry," she said, raising her head triumphantly. "Sure, I'm in." Mark volunteered to take charge of the finances, and by the end of the day, they had a tentative plan, grants, mentoring, an opportunity to really make a difference. It felt good, grounded, like he was building something Tessa couldn't destroy. Micah called that night, his voice crackling over the line. Plea agreement signed. Tessa's under house arrest in an apartment in Idaho. What a surprise. Julian could face 5 years or more in prison. Garrett is sitting on the couch with a glass of water in his hand and the TV muted in the background. "Idaho? What was she doing there?" he asked, frowning. "I don't know." Micah let out a soft laugh. "Rehabilitation programs, part of the agreement. Probably trying to reform." Garrett nodded, not surprised. "What about the gang from the villa?" Micah paused. "They were angry, but no charges were filed against you. The documents are fake. Nothing can be traced back to you. You're clean." Garrett was so relieved, he didn't even realize he'd been holding his breath. "Very good. Thank you, Micah. By the way, you're also on the board of the foundation." Micah laughed out loud, the kind that comes from the heart. "You just had to force me to say yes, didn't you?" The next few weeks were a busy one. Meetings, press releases, the tedious work of getting the Lane Foundation off to a slow start. The team rebranded around it, packaging the merger as a story of growth and giving back. Garrett went all in, staying late at the office and avoiding the house as much as possible. It's not just about the job, it's also about getting back on your feet. Tessa's betrayal shakes him up and makes him question everything. But this belongs to him. No lies, no games, just the real thing. Harper's team handles security, Micah handles legal matters, and he moves forward one step at a time. One night, he stayed late at the office as the lights of the city twinkled through the windows. The office was empty, just him and a stack of grant applications from young people from poor neighborhoods with big dreams. He read carefully, scribbling notes, feeling a spark that hadn't been there in months. That's why he fought so hard, not just to beat Tessa, but to get here. He doesn't hate her anymore. She exposed herself and showed him her true colors, and he used that to build something better. The mirror he held up for her wasn't revenge, it was clarification for both of them. He leaned back in his chair and stretched his arms, catching his reflection in the glass window. He looked tired and older, but steady. That's enough. The house still felt strange when I got home, too quiet and filled with her ghosts. He'd boxed up her things and stuffed them in the garage, but the big stuff he hadn't touched yet: the bed, the dresser, the life they'd shared. He doesn't need to rush the process. Now he lives in the present, not the past. The foundation is his center of gravity, his peace of mind. He made dinner, nothing special, just spaghetti and sauce, and ate it on the couch with the TV on low. The news scroll mentioned the merger, with a quick flash about the new initiative. Ryan Harwick launches foundation to support underserved entrepreneurs. He smiled, tiny but true. Tessa didn't take this from him. She pushed him into it. He thought of her in Idaho, locked in some apartment, staring at the walls instead of the view of the cottage. Does she regret it? Did she see the hole she dug? He doesn't know, and he doesn't need to know. She was out of his story. That chapter had been turned. The legacy fund is his future, and her future depends on how she creates it herself. He finished his spaghetti, put his plate in the sink, and grabbed a beer from the fridge. The cold bottle felt good in his hands and kept him grounded. He stepped out onto the back porch, the night air cool against his skin, and looked up at the stars. The stars were faint, obscured by the lights of the city, but they were there. Like him, after everything, still standing, still shining. The phone had been quiet that night. No calls, no updates, just him and the hum of the house and the rhythm of the life he was rebuilding. He stopped chasing the what-ifs and stopped thinking about her and Julian. They lost, and he won, not by destroying them, but by surpassing them. The Lane Foundation is proof of that, a legacy much grander than her betrayal. He took a sip of his beer, the bitterness fading to smoothness, and let the serenity of the night envelop him. It was his peace, hard-won, and his alone. Once again, Garrett stayed late in his office, the glow of a desk lamp piercing the darkness as he sifted through another stack of grant applications from the Lane Foundation. A few months had passed since the events in Morocco, Tessa's breakdown, and the launch of this new chapter, and he had settled into a rhythm. Work, come home, repeat. The house no longer felt so empty, and he began to fill it with new things, adding a chair here, hanging a painting there, as if reasserting his sovereignty. However, something broke the mold that night. He got home about 9 o'clock, with the crispness of fall in the air, and found a letter in the mailbox. No return address, just his name in her handwriting, Tessa's. His stomach clenched violently. He took the letter and walked into the house, dropping the key on the kitchen table. He stood there, staring at the letter for a minute, then tore the seal. Inside was a piece of paper, her handwriting slanted and scrawled as if she had written it in a hurry. Garrett, the letter begins. I don't expect you to read this letter, but I hope you will. I'm in a rehab program in Idaho. House arrest ends next month. You're right. I hit rock bottom. Julian is gone, locked up. Here I am, figuring out who I am without him, without you. Thank you for not saving me. That got me to start trying. There was no signature, just a small silver ring tucked in an envelope, a simple, plain gift from him to her for their first wedding anniversary, engraved with their initials. He squeezed the ring in his fingers, the cool touch of the metal coming through as he sat heavily on the couch. The TV was off, the house was silent, and all he could hear was his own breathing. He read the letter again, more slowly this time, trying to feel something. Anger, relief, any emotion. But it's like pressing on a bruise that's faded. She's in Idaho, in rehab, alone. No villa, no Julian, no grand escape plan. Just her and the mess she's made. Thank you for not saving me, she wrote. He wanted to know if she meant it. He didn't save her from the police, didn't save her from herself. But he didn't destroy her either. He let her fall, letting her bear the full weight of her choices. Maybe that was the push she needed, or maybe it was just words, another trick to try and impress him. He didn't know and didn't have the heart to figure it out. The ring reflected the light as he turned it, and the tiny G&T engraved on it shimmered faintly. He remembers giving her the ring, over dinner at the tiny Italian restaurant downtown, and when he slid it onto her finger, she smiled and said, "Forever," her eyes sparkling. Forever didn't last long. Garrett stood up, walked over to his office safe, a small one he'd installed after the merger, and opened it. The ring was put in, next to some old contracts and a wad of cash he kept for emergencies. Not out of nostalgia, not because he couldn't let it go, but because it belonged in the past and should be locked away with everything else. He closed the safe door, the click extra loud in the silence, and he felt the finality of the matter. It's over. Not for her, but for himself. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and stepped out onto the back porch, where the night was cool and quiet. The stars are clearer here than in town, away from the city haze. He leaned against the railing, letting the cold bottle bead up in his hands. Tessa thought she won when she took that bag, thought she and Julian and their big plan outsmarted him. He'd convinced her of that just long enough to watch it all fall apart. The last laugh was not loud or cruel. It was quiet, steady, and belonged to him. She's lost everything she tried to steal: her freedom, her future, even him. And he got stronger. The Lane Foundation was proof of that, running smoothly and changing lives while she sat in some monotonous apartment, picking up the pieces of her own mess. Garrett took a sip of his beer, the bitterness sharp on his tongue as he pondered how it had all happened: the bait bag, the GPS, Harper's fake profile, all the pieces working with clockwork precision. She was so sure she had won the jackpot when she opened that bag at the villa, only to find his note. Now you can start with nothing. He didn't write that to gloat. He wrote it to end it. And it did end. Julian is in prison, his cocky grin locked behind bars. Tessa is in rehab, and her charms are useless in the face of her own constructed reality. He didn't need to chase them, shout, or fight. He just stepped back and let them fall on their own. And that, in a nutshell, is the real victory. The porch creaked under his feet, and he shifted to look out over the yard, dark, overgrown, and untended since she'd left. He'll deal with it eventually, maybe plant something new. The foundation is now his center of gravity, but the house could also be a new beginning. Not from zero, as she wished, but from strength. He rebuilt the company and turned M&A into something grander, and he'll rebuild this place too. Tessa's letter didn't change anything. It was just a footnote, the last whisper from a life he had left behind. He doesn't hate her anymore. She showed him who she was, and he showed her who he could be. That's enough. He finished his beer, the empty bottle in his hand, then went back indoors and locked the door. The letter was left on the kitchen table, the ring safely locked in the safe, and he went upstairs. The bedroom no longer feels like hers. He changed the sheets, moved the furniture, made it his. He climbed into bed, the mattress firmly supporting him, and closed his eyes. These days, sleep comes easier. The weight of her betrayal lessened with each step he took forward. The foundation is growing. Applications are coming in like a tidal wave, and he has a team, Harper, Micah, Mark, to keep it all real. Tessa is out there, starting over with nothing, just like he promised. He didn't need to save her, didn't need to punish her. She had already punished herself. The next morning, he would wake up, make coffee, and go to the office. Life will go on, stable and certain. The last laugh was not about her defeat, but about his victory, not through revenge, but through purpose. He'd let her think she'd taken it all away, let her run with that illusion, and by the time it broke, he'd long since been building something better. The ring in the safe, the letter on the kitchen table, they're relics, not regrets. He rolled over, the darkness enveloping him gently, and let go. She'd lost everything she'd stolen, and he'd gained everything she couldn't touch. This is the end. And he, for one, was at peace with that. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.